welcome in technical session 10, which is going to be delivered by Dr. Uttam Kumar, IIT Bangalore, and he is going to talk about machine learning for data processing in earth sciences. So before starting the session, I request Dr. Ramesh sir give a brief biography about the Dr. Uttam sir.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shamlal. Dear participants and the guest speaker and other distinguished faculty members, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Uttam Kumar. Dr. Uttam Kumar is an assistant professor and Infosys Foundation Career Development Chair Professor at IIT Bangalore. He holds a master's degree in geoinformation science from University of Twente, the Netherlands, and PhD in algorithms for geospatial data analysis from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He worked at NASA Ames Research Center, California, USA for 4 years. He has published more than 30 research papers in national and international journals, 6 book chapters, 54 papers in conference proceedings, 8 technical reports. He has delivered more than 85 invited guest lectures and is the reviewer of 25 scientific journals. He has received several awards, including the Institution of Engineers India Young Engineers Award 2016, NASA Group Achievement Award by NASA, Washington, D.C., Certified Scientist of Sentinel of Science Award 2016 in the Earth and Planetary Sciences, 5 Best Paper Awards, and the Young Geospatial Scientist Award 2011, New Delhi. With this brief introduction, I welcome Dr. Uttam Kumar to deliver a talk on machine learning for data processing in earth sciences. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for the nice introduction. I am privileged to be a part of the summer school on machine learning and deep learning organized by IEEE Bangalore section and NIT Surathkal. So it's a privilege for me to present some of my work and share some of my results with you all. And without delay, so let me get into the discussion. So I have many things to show, but because of time constraints, focus on certain other aspects. Okay. Right. So. Okay. So let me get into the presentation now. Broadly, I work in the area of data science. Popularly nowadays, it's also known as data analytics and data mining. And I use lot of applied machine learning in image processing applications. Obviously, most of the data for my research comes from remote sensing and GIS. And since remote sensing generally gives us a lot of images in the form of spaceborne satellites or to UAVs, etc. So a lot of digital image processing techniques are used in the data analysis. And I also work in spatial computing, where we talk about spatial databases, and I teach database systems at the institute along with GIS, spatial computing, machine learning, etc. So typically I also teach the traditional database systems, and then slowly we move on to spatial database systems. So I do not have much content to show about database systems in this talk because of the limited scope of our I mean the workshop. But definitely I will be very happy to share results from other domains on which I am working. So I would like to start, I would like to divide my entire presentation in two halves. And in the first half, I would be willing to introduce you to the area of machine learning. I'm sure many of you or most of you or all of you would already know about the subject from previous lectures or from your previous experiences, reading materials, etc. But it would be nice for all those who have not been exposed to machine learning and would like to get some kind of an introduction. Henceforth, after the completion of the first part, talking about a little bit about machine learning, we will move on to some applications and see where all we use and where all are the possibilities of machine learning. Obviously, the list which I have here is not a comprehensive one about applications. It's a very small list, but perhaps it would open up door to think about a lot more ideas on related to application in GIS and in remote sensing. Okay, so I would start with a small introduction to statistics. So you may all of you may be aware that that actually statistics and not computer science is the field currently that is being challenged by different problems through science and through industry. Okay, so all of us are generally have the notion that computer science currently is the most sought after subject, but the origin of computer science actually comes from statistics. Okay, and when we bring challenges to this field, we actually are bringing problems to the scientists, to the professors, researchers working in statistics, and they tend to solve our problem through different statistical methods or probabilistic methods, and are then further pushed down into the computer science domain for different applications. Okay, this challenge is actually much more currently because of the growing data volume from different sources, limitation of limitation of human analysis or limitations of our capability, and also with the decreasing cost of machines. So these all are different topics which can be debated for a very long time, essentially focusing on spatial data analysis or machine learning problem. Okay, so now these problems have actually grown in both size and in complexity. Okay, and they throw different types of challenges to the user, starting from storage, data storage. Okay, so when I am talking about data, specifically I mean spatial data, but it could be any other data as well. Data storage, data organization, and then searching. Okay, so we will talk a lot about searching here, but not talk about storage and organization, which are more related to database management system or database systems. Okay, so later we will try to see and understand the word searching here. Okay, and these have together embarked a new field of science called spatial data science, right? Okay, so what's the challenge? So what's the big deal in dealing with all these data? The big deal or the focus is that how to extract important patterns and trends from the data. Okay, and when we try to do this, okay, we call it learning from data. Okay, so while trying to extract the important patterns and trends and observations from the data, we call this learning from data. So now, what is machine learning? Machine learning is essentially a set of computer programs that automatically improve. Okay, the important point here is that they automatically improve with learning. I will give specific examples about how this improvement takes place. Okay, improve with learning and also improve with experience. So a nice way to understand a machine learning problem is to see the problem from different perspectives, different angles, different views. Okay, and then look for a problem setting where you can apply different assumptions and different algorithms which are based on these assumptions. Right. Okay. Now I would slightly deviate from the current discussion, and I would ask you. I'm not sure still this holds, but the last time I was searching something on the web, I found that there is somebody which I will just show you in a few minutes, who is currently one of the top researchers in machine learning. Okay, given that we have been hearing about machine learning from almost a decade now, so any idea about who is considered to be the top cited researcher in machine learning as per Google Scholar? So when I say top cited, it also means that he is one of the greatest scientists, at least in machine learning, if not in computer science. Any idea? Can anyone guess who is that person who has the largest number of publications with largest number of citations for his different publications in machine learning? Any idea? Any of the audience? You can guess. Many of you have taken courses on Coursera, and the course on machine learning by Andrew Ng is a popular one. So yeah, yes, there is somebody who has raised a hand. Likewise, there are a few courses on being offered online, and some of those teachers are the greatest scientists. So you may have some idea about who could be that person. Anyone from the audience? Anyone from the audience? Okay, let me get back to the discussion. So the most cited machine learning researcher in the world is Professor Robert Tibshirani. He is a professor of biomedical data science and statistics at Stanford University. Okay, he is that person. You may have read his book, or in the process of learning machine learning, or reading his. So two of his books are very popular. I will come to those books. And as per the recent statistics, his total number of citations are close to 400,000, specifically in machine learning and statistics. So he is considered to be one of the pioneer in machine learning as per his publication records. Okay, I was browsing his website and I found something interesting in his website. I have put the website details here. Okay, and I have copy pasted the two paragraphs here. Okay, I will read out for you, and then I would ask something from these two paragraphs. He says, Professor Robert Tibshirani says, in elementary and high school, I loved mathematics. As an undergraduate in university, I took mostly math and computer science courses. I found that math got to be too abstract for my liking, and computer science seems concerned with little details, trying to save a microsecond or a kilobyte in a computation. In statistics, I found a subject that combined the beauty of both math and computer science, using them to solve real world problems. Okay, paragraph change. Today, statistics is more important than ever because of the ease with which we can collect large amounts of data. The challenge is to sort through all of this data and separate out the consistent patterns from the noise. Okay, this challenge now touches many areas of science, engineering, medicine, finance, and even the arts. Statistics is a young subject still finding its way. It is an exciting time to be a statistician because of the enormous computational tools at our disposal. How best to use these tools is a fundamental challenge for our subject and the focus of my research. Okay, so my question to all of you is, do you find something interesting in the two paragraphs? Find something interesting in the two paragraphs? Obviously, when I say interesting, it essentially relates to data science or machine learning. What is that line or word that makes you to think something different in the two paragraphs?
Sorry, Uttam sir.
Yes, yes.
So we'll have discussion in the end, sir.
Okay, okay, fine,
Because
fine.
they are unmuted, sir.
Okay, sure. Okay. So the interesting part here is that, okay, there is no mention of the term machine learning in the two paragraphs. And this person happens to be the highly cited topmost researcher in machine learning in the world. Okay, so the message here is that It's machine learning is not a domain restricted only to a certain class of people having certain background. It's open to everyone, specifically for a person coming from statistics. This is how he takes up the machine learning problem. This is how he solves the machine learning problem. Okay, and then now he finds solutions to a diverse range of problems from different domains. All right. Right. So how did statistical learning evolve? At the beginning of the 19th century, Legendre and Gauss published their papers on least square, and this is what is widely used in a lot of problems in the earliest form of linear regression. In 1936, Fisher, who is a popular statistician, he proposed linear discriminant analysis. 1940, logistic regression came into the world. 1970, generalized linear models were proposed by Nelden and Wedenburg, and then in 1980, nonlinear methods were first time introduced. Mid 80s, Bremen et al., who are very popular, who have developed the decision tree, random forest, etc., they introduced classification and regression tree, which is popularly called CARD. Okay, 1986, Hasty and Tibshirani, whom I was talking about, they coined the generalized additive models. Okay, then onwards, the statistical learning and machine learning came into picture. So if you happen to study some of the fundamental books in machine learning, you will see that they are popularly known as statistical learning. Okay, there are some nice books on statistical learning, and specifically Professor Tibshirani is the author of 2 books. I will come to that later. So what is learning in machine learning? Okay, so imagine a few examples here to understand them. Computer learning from medical records. Okay, which treatments are most effective for new diseases. Okay, a smart house. So we all talk about smart homes, smart houses. So what does smart home mean? Smart home means basically we are trying to optimize certain things in the house. For example, energy cost, water usage, okay, or switching off or switching on certain electrical appliances depending on their demand. Okay, a most common application of learning in machine learning is the one that we handle day to day. Google Assistant. All of us use Google indiscriminately throughout the day. We have Google Assistant, and then we have Google application in our mobile, and then Cortana, and then one Siri in our iMac and iPads. So there are so many, right? And all of them in some sense guide us. They learn from our day-to-day behavior. They try to understand our daily routine, and then they possibly give us some kind of a clue that if you are trying to go to your office, this is the time you should start, or else you will encounter some traffic. Okay, they will update us about the weather and so on. Okay, so our concern is not to analyze the English word learning. From all these examples which I have cited, our concern is not to analyze the meaning of English word learning. Instead, learning here means to define precisely a class of problems. Okay, a class of problems that encompass interesting forms of learning. Okay, to explore algorithms to solve these problems, to solve this class of problems, their structure and their processes. This is what we call learning in machine learning. Okay, so there are several examples, numerous infinite examples of machine learning trying to predict whether a patient who has some symptoms of heart attack will have another heart attack or not based on his vitals or some other parameters, trying to predict the price of a stock in 6 months, identifying handwritten zip code from a digitized image, estimating the amount of glucose and trying to predict whether a patient is diabetic or non-diabetic, and so on. There are numerous examples. These are a few which relate from our day-to-day life, and we are able to understand the problem better. So after having a small introduction, we will very quickly touch upon 2 to 3 terms here, and then slowly move on to case studies. So classification and prediction are 2 important class of problems that are widely solved in machine learning. Okay, in classification, we try to predict categorical class labels, okay, such as mostly which are discrete or nominal. For example, you may assign A, B, C, D, or in a remote sensing application, you may assign urban, water, vegetation, barren land, snow, and so on. So this is predicting categorical class level. Okay, so in this classification, we try to construct a model. The model is based on some training data, and based on the training, we try to assign labels to unseen data values. On the other hand, prediction means to model continuous values functions. Okay, so prediction will try to predict unknown or missing values. Prediction is mostly used uh, for interpolation. Okay, prediction guarantees interpolation but not extrapolation. Okay, a popular algorithm for prediction is your linear regression. Okay, so now having seen the two types of supervised learning methods, I mean, where we use training data, ground truth. Okay, we are now ready, or we stand at a point to differentiate two important terms in machine learning. One is a supervised learning, where the algorithm works in a supervised manner. We have some observations, measurements, and these observations and measurements are used to train the algorithm. Having trained the algorithm, we get a model, and then we use this model to classify new data set. Okay, so essentially the algorithms, the studies what we saw here, classification and prediction, both of them use existing observations. On the other hand, in unsupervised classification or unsupervised learning, which is also popularly called as clustering, there is no notion of observation. There is no training data. Okay, so what do? Given a set of data points, we try to see what are the possible natural groupings in the data. Okay, and we have the aim that there exist certain clusters or groups in the data. Okay, let's see an example. So this is a autonomous car which was being widely used by Google for their experiments in Mountain View when I was there. So they typically employ some kind of a supervised learning, and they learn from their mistakes. So if they happen to cross a red signal, or they happen to hit somebody or some object, so they learn that okay, now henceforth we should not repeat the mistake, and with experience they keep on improving. So it is expected that at some point of time they may become more perfect than humans, and there will be absolutely no scope of any error while driving, and you will be completely safe when you sit in an autonomous car. On the other hand, this is an example of the number of Facebook users across the globe, and has been generated using unsupervised learning. Okay, so it's not an output of a k-means clustering. K-means clustering will not give you this kind of output, because this is more related to spatial clustering. You are trying to show density of Facebook users per square unit area on the ground. Okay, and this typically uses clustering and uses density based clustering, because we would like to show what is the density of Facebook account holders across the globe. Okay, so what does clustering do? Clustering will try to collect data objects which are similar, okay, and separate them from dissimilar data objects which are unrelated. It's widely used in data segmentation. Okay, and it's an unsupervised form of learning. There are no predefined classes. Clustering is very often used as a standalone tool for a lot of experiments, statistical experiments, and also it's used as a pre-processing step for many of the algorithms. Example of clustering. So all of us get up in the morning, and we knowingly or unknowingly, willingly or unwillingly, we try to see the mobile and try to look at the latest news happening across the globe. So we see different types of news every day, but more interestingly, we are not willing, or we are not bothered about all the things happening across the globe. Some people are interested in certain sports activities, somebody in politics, and so on. So can we somehow group these news so that the news can be displayed on the person's smart device such as mobile smartphone, depending upon the person's choice. Okay, somebody may like entertainment or politics or sports, so can we display these news as per the person's likings. So this is called clustering. We cluster the data based on some keywords, so these keywords may be related to politics or sports or entertainment and so on. Okay, there are a large number of applications in clustering, starting from biology to information retrieval, lot of applications in land use, basically in remote sensing and GIS, marketing, city planning, earthquake, climate studies, and so on. Okay, so now let's talk about the two techniques again, just to summarize what we have learned. Okay, so we talked about regression. So in regression, we see that the output variable is a to be predicted is a continuous variable. Okay, for example, score of a student. Okay, or it could be daily rainfall observation. Okay, and so on. So essentially, I am now summarizing the three techniques which we have learned or seen till now. Okay, regression is one among them, which predicts a continuous variable. Classification is the one which predicts a categorical variable. Okay, such as a class A, B, C, D, or class urban, water, and so on. Clustering, there is no notion of label. Hence, we try to group the clusters based on certain criteria. So regression and classification, they come under supervised learning methods, and clustering falls under unsupervised. Why unsupervised? Because there is no supervision of ground truth. There is no supervision of training data. There is no notion of labels. Hence the name unsupervised learning methods. Okay, so to make the picture more clear, in regression we have a label, in classification we have a label, in clustering we do not have a label. Regression type of label is continuous, classification type of label is categorical. Okay, so this is all about machine learning, and then one can dive deep into it and then learn a lot of algorithm, practice a lot of algorithm, but essentially most of them will be most of them will be grouped under only these two broader techniques, supervised and unsupervised. Okay, what are some of the perspective and issues in machine learning? So I'm not discussing any algorithm as such, which probably you can learn better from internet or sources on web or books, etc. So essentially trying to give some idea to the beginners who would like to go deep into these subjects. Okay, so what are some of the perspective and issues in machine learning? Machine learning basically involves searching a large space of possible hypotheses. Okay, searching a large space of possible hypotheses. And what are these? What is a hypothesis? Hypothesis is basically a statement, a parameter of one or more population. Okay, so machine learning looks into a very large space of possible hypotheses. And why does it do this? Machine learning does this, searches this large space, because it wants to determine the hypothesis that best fits the observed data. So there might be large number of hypotheses in the search space, but machine learning will help you to narrow down to the best hypothesis that will fit on the observed data. Okay, some example of these algorithms which will help you to search the best possible hypothesis are linear functions or decision trees, artificial neural networks, and so on. Okay, obviously some of these algorithms, they have some certain assumptions behind them, some genesis behind them. They also depend on some underlying representation, which we will not talk about too much in detail in today's session. Okay, so these different hypotheses, what algorithms look into, are appropriate for learning different kind of target functions. So target functions means a function that will help you to map all the different observations in the data to either class A or class B or class C or class D and so on. Okay, so here learning as a search problem. See the learning, the term learning in a machine learning is actually a search problem. We are searching the best hypothesis, or we are searching the hypothesis that best fits the data. Okay, and obviously, if it best fits the data, you can model the data, and once you model the data, you can actually predict the class labels from the model data. Okay, so see the word learning in machine learning as a search problem. Okay, what do we consider in this mechanism? We consider the size of hypothesis space to be searched. If it is too large, then the algorithm might take too much time to narrow down to a hypothesis which is the best solution. Okay, it also depends on the number of training examples we have. If the training examples are abundant, okay, it will basically help you to develop a robust model or help you to come up with a hypothesis that best fits the data. It will help you to learn the model very well. Okay, and the confidence that a hypothesis is consistent with the training data. So it should not happen that if I collect a training data tomorrow, the hypothesis does not perform well with the new data. Okay, so whatever hypothesis we build on the data has to be consistent even though there is some variation in the training data. Why this variation should be minimum? Because if the variation is minimum, the hypothesis will be more consistent and it will correctly generalize all unseen examples. Okay, uh, it may also happen that your training data drastically changes. Okay, in such cases it's difficult to retrain the pre-existing model and make it workable again. In those cases it is recommended that you develop the model from scratch and do not use old models. All right, so typically designing a machine learning problem will involve these four steps: a number of design choices, okay, selecting the training experience, and a target function that has to be learned for, and then an algorithm for learning the target function. So what are these? What do they say? They say that you have to first of all worry about collecting the training samples. Okay, then you have to think about what are the class labels you are interested in. Specifically in remote sensing applications, you can have n number of target class labels, right? For example, if we just consider the land use or the land cover, it can range from desert to mountain to water, forest, vegetation, snow, glacier, so on. So we have to first narrow down to a set of labels that we are interested in, and then look for a suitable algorithm that will learn these class labels from the training data. These are the few important steps that are typically kept in mind while designing a machine learning approach to a spatial classification problem. Okay, so let's see now. This is very simple. You have some kind of a pattern, okay, and you have to guess the next one. So this is called a prediction problem. Okay, you are trying to predict what next, right? Now, look at the second example. The class one, that there are square boxes, and each bigger box here has two black and two white boxes. They are arranged in different patterns. Okay, and I say that this pattern, either it is arranged diagonally like this or like this. We will call it class 1. Okay, if it is if the black boxes are arranged vertically or horizontally, we will call class 2. Okay, what about this? Okay, so this is typically our training data with a certain kind of pattern and also class label, class 1, class 2. We will use this training data to learn class 1 and class 2, the model developing class 1 and class 2. Okay, so this is typically a classification problem. We learn from these examples. Okay, we develop a rule saying that if the black boxes are diagonal, let's call them class 1. If the black boxes are either vertical or horizontal, let's call them class 2. Okay, and this is typically a classification problem. Any new data point like this will be either classified to class 1 or to class 2. Okay, so the previous slide showed a prediction problem, and this slide shows a classification problem. We can now extend this problem okay, to different real-time applications. So you asked the algorithm to learn different make and models of the car. Okay, and then you give one single image of a car and say that, okay, now let's predict which is this car. The problem can now be extended to airlines. So you train the algorithm with multiple number of flights, and then you give a new flight and say that, okay, let's predict which is this flight. Okay, we can extend the problem to many different areas. So what is the essence of all this learning? There has to be a pattern, because if there is no pattern, what do we learn? We will not get any information from the data. Okay, pattern may or may not be captured in a mathematical expression. It's not always easy to capture the pattern through a mathematical formula. Okay, so on a higher level, all of us may think that, okay, an algorithm is going to learn something and come out with a pattern. But the underlying principle is that all these algorithms in machine learning, they try to develop some mathematical expression for the patterns captured in the data. Okay, so there is a lot of mathematics involved behind all this learning. We may not be able to realize this because as an end user, we are more interested in application. But how does the algorithm work? It basically develops different mathematical expressions for each of the pattern found in the data, and this is indeed not always easy. There has to be a lot of data to develop these mathematical expressions. Okay, so there could be simple cases where it is easy to develop a mathematical model for some pattern, but there could be some tricky ones also. Okay, so for example, this is one slightly tricky. You have a f is equal to -1 and f is equal to +1 for these patterns. These patterns. Now I give you another instance and say, okay, tell me what is f now for this pattern. So not really easy, right? And this is a typically an example of a small 3 by 3 image. This can also happen in real time. I mean, these two black boxes would be, let's say, urban, and the white boxes would be non-urban. And this is a kind of urban pattern that you see in an image. I give you a new urban pattern and say, tell me what is this. So can your algorithm predict this? Right, so this is slightly tricky. So apart from the existence of pattern mathematical expression, we have to seek a process that can capture this underlying pattern. Okay, and we should not explicitly tell this every time to the algorithm. So if the algorithm learns by itself uh, about all the patterns in the data, we call this learning from data. Okay, so from data we actually derive features. Okay, so if you have multi-dimensional data, typically a multispectral image from any satellite is a multi-dimensional data. You will have several samples of the same class in different bands, and from these pixels you derive features. So from data we move on to features. Okay, from features we develop their distribution graph, something like a histogram. So we have training sample number here on the x-axis and number of the boxes on the y-axis corresponding to this image. Okay, so you see that they fall in certain pattern. Okay, these training samples fall in certain patterns. So these patterns, these are my feature vectors, and from the features we will develop the pattern. So these are also called instances, data instances. So we map each of these data instances to features: feature 1, feature 2, feature 3. If there are three bands, three multispectral bands, blue, green, red, near infrared, so for 4 bands it will be 4 features, and so on. Okay, so you can see this separability of two classes, the gray square boxes and the blue plus signs, are very easy. You can draw a straight line and separate them. Okay, problem becomes slightly difficult if you have this kind of data. So the idea is, how do you learn this pattern to separate plus symbols from the square boxes? Right, it's a non-linear problem. So you have to very nicely draw this boundary such that it covers all the plus symbols and it doesn't touch any of these areas, and then you are able to separate the two classes. So it is very often true with spatial data, with remote sensing data, that these kind of patterns will be present, and then we need to use an algorithm which can separate this non-linear non-linear distribution of the data. Okay, so what did we saw all around? We saw that learning involves searching through a possible hypothesis space that fits all the data which is available in the form of training data. Okay, and additionally we can also put some constraints on the data. I will show you some examples of constraints later on. So we have a training algorithm, we have a learning algorithm or a machine learning algorithm. We have training data, okay, which we feed to the learning algorithm. We develop a model. From the model, we develop inference. This inference is applied on the test data for prediction. Once you predict the labels for all the unseen data, we try to evaluate these algorithms by using some test labels, and then we compute the accuracy. Once we have the accuracy, we can say that okay, our model is 80% accurate or 90% accurate or 95% accurate, and so on. There are different measures, different ways of computing accuracy, which will be not possible to cover in this session, which you can also refer from lot of online materials or standard textbooks. Okay, let's look at some of the issues in machine learning. So even I faced and everyone faces these issues in while first time or any time working with a machine learning problem. Given a large number of algorithms available in the market, off the shelf, free, on open source, and so on, which algorithm performs best for what type of problem and representation and in what settings is a question that everyone faces, or is a problem that everyone faces and needs and seeks to know the answer. Another very important question is how much training data is sufficient. Okay, so this is easy if your study area is approachable, you can go and collect data. But what happens if your study area is remote? How much training data is sufficient? Okay, what and how can prior knowledge guide the process of determining correct target concepts? How do you incorporate your prior knowledge to the model to improve the classification accuracy? And how can the learner automatically alter its representation to improve its ability to learn the target function? So what this bullet means is that if you have new data coming into your data repository, how do you alter your model so that your model also learn the new data which will be coming tomorrow or day after tomorrow? This is very true for stream data. For example, the data for which you have no clue what will be coming tomorrow. Learning from, for example, learning from YouTube videos. We have no idea what type of videos will be uploaded by users today late evening or tomorrow morning. But I need my algorithm to be adaptive in nature so that it reads the caption on and automatically puts that video in the appropriate category. Okay. There are large number of research topics in machine learning and in trying to look into pattern. Some of them are application specific, some of them are trying to develop scalable and interactive algorithm. There are a lot of work going on web search engines, database systems, cloud computing, a lot of machine learning going on in social media platforms. Facebook uses a lot of machine learning. And then there are enormous applications in earth sciences, specifically related to spatio-temporal data, moving objects, neighborhoods, trying to look at chain detection, and so on. Apart from that, machine learning has a role in all different disciplines we see every day: multimedia, text, biological and biomedical data, real-time data streams, privacy protection, information security, and so on. Okay, so as an example, we use this every day. All of us have Gmail accounts, and when we get an email, it is automatically directed to one of the categories. For example, official, promotional, personal, and so on. Right. So if the email is spam or ham, we will be able to come to know. Typically, Google also deploys this kind of algorithm which automatically redirects your incoming email to either one of the predefined directory labels, or if it is a spam, it will go to the spam folder. Okay, so I wanted to ask a quiz right now here, but I think since all of you are muted, so I will try to skip that and move ahead with the next slide. Just wanted to know how good have you understood the topic from the little bit of introduction that I gave, but we will try to move on later on. If time permits, I'll come back to this slide. Okay, these are some useful resources and are typically some very standard books that are generally referred in machine learning, irrespective of the domain you are planning to apply. So the Robert Tifshirani, which I was talking about, has two books, that one here and one here. One is an introduction to statistical learning with applications in R, and the other is the elements of statistical learning. So this book is intended for the beginners, and this is intended for medium to expert level or users. To begin with, Mitchell TM Machine Learning, or this third book by James Hasty and Tipshirani, An Introduction to Statistical Learning, is a good one. For advanced users who are already familiar with the basic terms, you can move on to Elements of Statistical Learning or Pattern Recognition Machine Learning by Bishop. So these are the ones which are very popular in the market. You may also get more books in the library or while searching online, but these generally suffice most of our needs. These are some journals which are often referred in machine learning. These are some IEEE journals. IEEE Transactions on Pattern Analysis and Machine Intelligence is one. It is also called IEEE TPAMI, which is very popular among machine learning developers. Machine learning is another journal. In terms of conferences, ICML, NIPS, and ICLR, ISCAI, and these are some popular ones. I mean, these are all A-rated conferences. So if you really want to read some very interesting papers, latest developments, state-of-the-art methods, so these are some of the conferences where people publish some of the state-of-the-art developments. Further, you have to explore the subject because it is so vast that really difficult to cover in a 1.5 hour session. So I just gave one some very brief introduction. Now I will move on to some case studies and show you some applications here. Every one of us, now we want to go to these places. All of us are bored sitting at home in the lockdown. Even after lockdown is over, people are really not going out of home until unless there is an emergency. But we would surely and in any way would like to visit these places which brings a change in our mood and environment. Right, these are all natural resources we have obtained from the earth. Okay, and these are all different land use, land cover categories. Typically some of them are land cover, some of them are land use, but these the two terms are sometimes used interchangeably to portray different physical features on the earth. Okay, they can include land, water, but all of them in some sense requires planning so that we are able to ensure that there is sustainability in the environment. Okay, we do not lose them. So I will briefly touch upon the terms land cover and land use. Land cover refers to the physical and biological cover present over the surface of land. For example, water, vegetation. Vegetation will include forest, agriculture, crops, horticulture, and so on. Land use is defined from human perspective, such as a land being used for agriculture, forestry, building construction, which could be either residential, commercial, and so on. So changes happening in either land use and land cover, mostly because humans are involved in these changes. They are essentially bringing lot of distress to our environment. They are causing they are some of the major reasons for causing global warming, pollution of water, alteration in precipitation pattern, biodiversity loss, groundwater depletion, and so on. So there is an urgent need to look at these changes and arrest them so that no more further changes are responsible for degrading the environment. So therefore, land use, land cover change studies are very popular. At least in the last 2 decades, have gained lot of momentum across the country, across the world. There are several projects, ongoing projects, where people are looking into land use and land cover from a district to a city, to a state level, to a country level, and then trying to see how do you manage such large changes. So there are a large number of remote sensing satellites that are that provide data publicly to us free of cost. And out of that, a few I have mentioned in this table, and I would be showing some applications of the Landsat series of data and the Modi series of data and Sentinel-2. Okay, so there are others which also are available for us to use. All these data from Landsat mission, MODIS and Sentinel are free of cost, available across the globe at certain temporal resolution, and for any part of the world. So we need a browser to browse these scenes for our specific study area and download them on our laptop or desktop to work on that. So there is a new concept of Google Earth Engine, which possibly some other speaker might cover in the workshop. I will just give a two slides introduction to that, where you do not have to download these data on your laptop. These data from Landsat, MODIS and Sentinel are already available in the cloud, and with some customized algorithm, and without downloading anything, just with internet connectivity, you can do all processing in the Google Earth Engine itself. So Google Earth Engine is a kind of a cloud-based platform. I'll come back to that a little bit later. So most of you may be aware of the different types of resolutions, the spatial resolution, the spectral resolution, the temporal resolution, the radiometric resolution. Spatial resolution, the first one which I told, is essentially related to what is the area on ground being depicted or being shown by one pixel in your image. So higher the area shown in the on the ground, higher is your spatial resolution. Okay, and for example, 4 meter is lower compared to 1 meter. So here 1 meter is a higher resolution. Okay, higher resolution image will have more clarity compared to lower spatial resolution. Okay, so now I will show you one example. This example I have shown in many talks, and people have actually got some clue, some kind of idea of what all chain detection can do. So classification, as we have already seen, is a kind of a procedure where we will group individual pixels into some groups or classes or themes, and this will be done by a machine learning algorithm which has been trained by a set of training data. Okay, so I have a small set of slides to show you the growth of Bangalore city, and still we are working on different aspects of the city, looking in. Our student Ms. Rahisha and Ms. Anindita, they are all working on transport model urban greenery for Bangalore city. But this is just a preliminary study results which I wanted to share with you. All of us are aware Bangalore has been growing a lot in the last 3 decades because of the so many IT and BT company landed up in the city in different areas. So Bangalore has in fact grown more than the actual boundary itself, and there are settlements or urban areas outside the Greater Bangalore boundary. So we have taken a slightly bigger area to encompass all these new development, such as for example the new airport, which is in the northern part of the city, but actually outside the city. So likewise, different settlements have come up in different corners of the city outside the city boundary limits. So we wanted to look at the change happening in Bangalore across different years, kind of a chain detection application. So we got one Landsat image from 1973, and we classified it into 4 classes. The red pixels, they indicate urban areas here, and the green pixels, without any question, they are all the greenery around us, be it forest, agriculture, horticulture, and so on. The blue pixels are all water bodies, lakes, etc., and pink one or other classes, which could be barren or just ground which has not been used for any other purpose. So we did this classification for different years, and specifically it is interesting to see the red pixels which keep on increasing in quantity, in the number, throughout the different images: 92, 2000, 2004, 2009, 2014, 2018. So we are still doing some experiments to see the changes in 2021. Obviously, the growth has now slowed down because of the current pandemic situation. Last 1.5 years has not witnessed enough of urban growth, specifically in and around the city, because of decreased demand by the people. But this is the overall picture in the last 25 to 30 years in the city. So this is an example of a chain detection where you can actually map different changes happening across the image in different years, and then this kind of analysis helps us to answer different contextual questions. For example, what change has taken place at a particular location? Okay, which location satisfies certain conditions? How has the land use changed across a period of time? So these simple questions are really interesting to see, and very systematically can be derived from these time series images. So as you can see in the graph here, graph clearly shows the increase in the built up area and decrease in water and vegetation across the Bangalore city. Okay, so this was a typical example of a chain detection problem. Although chain detection can be done in numerous ways, including image differencing, and people have now started using cellular automata and so on. But this was just a time series classified image used to generate statistics across the years. Okay, this example essentially focused on assigning one class to one pixel, but now we will move further and try to see whether can we assign multiple classes to a pixel. Okay, so this is not complicated. I will come to this problem by giving you a background before we get into the work. Actually, most land use classes that we use in day-to-day life or on the real world are not distinct. It's never true that one single pixel is building and the next immediate pixel is water. So because most of these land use classes on the ground, they tend to share boundaries with other classes, maybe in the adjoining pixel, and this is specifically more true when your resolution is low. Okay, so as an example, you see the 4 cases here, and there are 3 different classes or 3 different objects, I would say, in this pixel: the black one, the gray one, and the background. Okay, in this example, you see that 3 different boundaries are sharing their areas in this particular pixel. Uh, in this example, you see that a straight line is passing through the pixel. This straight line could be a road or a highway and so on. So it doesn't cover the entire pixel, but partially goes across the pixel. Okay, but what happens in normal classification? We tend to assign one class, maybe urban, to this pixel, even though only a part of the pixel has been covered by road, and the other area may be grassland or simple lawn, okay, or just grass. So what is happening here is we have actually 2 classes present in the pixel on the ground, but because of the way machine learning algorithms have been designed, we generally assign only one class to a pixel, which is actually wrong. Right, let me show another example. So this is a 3 by 3 Landsat pixel. Okay, you see this is a water body. Okay, it's clearly this is a water body and there is no ambiguity. Here in this pixel, part of the pixel, maybe 50 or 60% is covered with parking lot with some cars, and another part is covered with the lawn. Okay, in this pixel, part of the pixel is covered with grassland. Here part of the pixel is covered with road, and part of the pixel is covered with water. Okay, so likewise in other pixel. So this causes a typical problem called a mixed pixel problem. It's not a single class problem, but a mixed pixel problem. So as you can see in this example, a single pixel Landsat pixel of 30 meter by 30 meter has vegetation, water, and settlement. Red shows settlement, shown by the letter S. V means vegetation, W means water. Typically, what happens is when we use any machine learning algorithm, the dominant class present in the pixel is assigned to that class, to that pixel as a class level. So here, I think green is present in maximum amount. Green is vegetation. So the whole pixel is classified as vegetation as a in a per pixel classification. But what is true? The truth is that only 20% of the pixel is settlement, 60% is vegetation as shown here, and remaining 20% is water. This is called subpixel classification. We are trying to delineate different classes within one single pixel. Okay, so there has been work in this area starting from 1989 onwards. When people tried using simple linear models to model these distribution of class 1, class 2 and class 3, which typically share one pixel. Okay, so what do they do is they have this equation, linear equation, where y is the reflectance of this pixel at location x comma y is equal to the reflectance of class 1 into area of class 1 plus reflectance of class 2 into area of class 2 and so on. So summation of the reflectance into area and plus a random noise eta. So here alpha n is a scalar quantity, okay, and E is the end member, which is the reflectance of that particular class. Okay, so this distribution of class 1, 2, 3 has been attempted to model by the simple linear equation with some random noise eta. On this model, we impose two constraints. One is the abundance non-negativity constraint, other is a abundance sum to one constraint. Non-negativity says that no class can be negative. I cannot have minus 10% water in the pixel. Sum to one constraint says that if you add up all the classes, it should be 100%. Okay, so the first paper published in IEEE Transactions on Geoscience and Remote Sensing solved this problem using ordinary least square, which is quite easy. Uh, just hold 1 second. I will. Okay, so ordinary least square tries to minimize the norm of the vector. Okay, take the norm of the vector, where vector is my reflectance value of the pixel and the product of n
Uh,
number spectrum into abundance.
Professor,
Okay.
sorry for interrupting.
Yes, yes.
Your slide is not visible.
Okay, just hold on. Just hold on. Just hold on. Is it now visible?
Yeah, I think it may come. Not coming,
Is
sir.
it now? Okay,
Ah,
okay.
coming,
Yeah.
coming,
So
coming, coming.
yes. Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
So I was in this slide,
Yes, yes.
and I was trying to address the solution which has been proposed to solve this mixing problem. Okay, so traditionally people have used ordinary least square where they take the norm of the vector, norm of the difference of the vector. Y is reflectance of that pixel, and y is the reflectance of this complete pixel. E is the reflectance of class 1, class 2, class 3, and alpha is the proportion of class 1, class 2, class 3. Okay, and if you just solve using ordinary least square, you end up getting the value of alpha. This term, so this expression shows the value of alpha. Alpha is my class proportion for class 1, class 2, class 3 in this mixed pixel. Okay, so I have just solved this problem without putting any constraint, and this is called an unconstrained solution to the problem. Alpha is equal to E transpose E inverse E transpose Y minus lambda by 2 into 1. So this is simple to derive. So for a long time, people have been using. Just 1 second. Mm, yeah. People have been using this particular way to solve the problem. Later in around 2000, Professor Chang from the University of Maryland, from the electrical engineering department, solved the same problem using orthogonal subspace projection. So what he did is he brought the concept of signals in images, and he told that the class in which you are interested is a signal in which you are interested, and all other classes are your noise. So essentially what you do is you develop a model called DU model, D is my where D is my desired signal, U is my undesired signal, and try to separate them by this model. So what they do is they try to compute the signal to noise ratio, and in the process they try to maximize the signal to noise ratio. Okay, which on after a few steps, mathematical steps, gives us the value of alpha p, and alpha is actually the abundance of the pth target material in that particular pixel. So essentially this was another approach proposed after almost 10 years to solve the same problem. Okay, so now these two were the only two methods available to solve this problem for almost 20 years. When later on developments took place around 2010-11, when a group from Italy uh, developed methods to unmix mixed pixel in the images. I'll come to that later on. Okay, so this is the least square solution which was talking about without any constraint, and it happens to be the unconstrained solution to the problem. Okay, the problem can become more complicated if this scenario holds. If this scenario holds, okay, so right now we are assuming that it's a linear classification problem, right, where the sunlight hits the earth, and the reflected energy goes back to the sensor. But what happens if the sunlight hits the earth and then hits multiple objects on the ground before going to the sensor? Right, it can hit a building, and then a tree, and then an aeroplane, and then go back to the sensor. So this will create a non-linear mixing, and is typically difficult to solve compared to the linear mixture model. So we did some work on non-linear mixture model, where we used a neural network to solve this kind of a problem, and this is a non-linear mixture. So this is documented in our paper published in Information Journal. So here we developed a neural network. We use a neural network algorithm, and then developed the framework to solve non-linear mixture problem. So this is the architecture of the multi-layer perceptron. I will skip this part. Let's come to the results part. So before applying to the actual case study, we experimented with some computer simulated data by simulating 200 bands hyperspectral data for the 4 minerals: alunite, budugonite, kalonite, and calcite. They are available freely in public domain using this simulation function. And then we just perform a simple supervised classification. We got this output. Later on, we unmixed each pixel in the image, and we got this output. Okay, so you see here that there are 4 outputs for the 4 different classes. The output of each class ranges from 0 to 1. 0 means absence of that class, 1 means full presence of that class in that pixel. Intermediate values from 0 to 1 will represent fractional presence of that class in a pixel. Okay, the first row here is our output from a linear mixture model, where we assume that sunlight hits the ground and goes back to the sensor. The second one is the case where we assume that the sunlight not only hits the ground but interacts with multiple objects in the environment before going to the sensor. So for the same simulated scene, this is the output from linear mixture model, this is the output from non-linear mixture model. Okay, both were analyzed with respect to some kind of bidirectional function plot using scatter diagram with actual real proportion on the x-axis and the proportion estimated from the model on the y-axis. Okay, then next we applied the same algorithm on real-time data. This is one area from Bangalore, Bangalore city. This is the Lalbagh Lake, and this is the golf course. Okay, and this is the area near Majestic. So this is at 1 meter resolution. This image is at 4 meter. This image is at 25 meter. This image is at 250 meter. So 1 meter and 4 meter were obtained from Iconos satellite, and 25 meter is the Landsat data, which is actually 28 meter, 30 meter, but resampled to 25 meter, so that there is a consistency in comparison. 250 meter is the Modi's data, where which is obviously very coarse, so you can see a lot of mixing has happened within each pixel. The algorithm was applied to all these different resolution data, considering starting with 2 classes and then moving on to 3 classes, and then the outputs were validated. So same experiment was conducted near Kolar area, Kolar Chikbalapur area, just ahead of the international airport. And this is the Nandi Hill here. This is the Nandi Hill forest. This is Chikbalapur town. Okay, if we go north of the airport in Bangalore International Airport, this is the next district, Chikbalapur district. So this area belongs to that particular district. So this is your classified image using per pixel classification, and 1, 2, B, C, D, E, F, G are my output of unmixing from for the 6 different classes. So these are all the forest pixels, specifically showing the Nandi Hill forest. These are all the agriculture areas, and this is the Chikbalapur town. Remaining are the black in color because there is no other settlement in those regions, and so on. This is the error distribution curve of latitude, longitude on the x and y, and the magnitude of error on the z-axis, which actually gave us some hint that agriculture and wasteland were mixing in certain areas, more specifically in the northern part of the image, because the agriculture land in the agriculture land there were no crops. So the without crops, these are called fallow lands. So fallow lands looked very similar to wasteland, and therefore they were misclassified. Apart from that, most of the other errors were below a threshold set by us, so they could be understood nicely. Okay, this table shows the correlation coefficient and RMSE of the 2 different types of models that were used. And basically the findings were that if you consider the mixing of signals to be non-linear, your output is actually better. But most of the current algorithms, they have focused on assuming that the mixture is linear because of the complexity involved in assuming a non-linear mixing of different signals. Okay, I will not touch into n-member variability. Basically, here we try to address a problem when you have multiple classes of the similar type. Okay, for example, consider a building. So a building may have a RCC, a concrete roof, or it may have a asbestos roof, or it may have a tile roof. So if you are further separating buildings based on the type of materials used to build a terrace, then then encompassing all these differences, variations within the class is called n-member variability. We had developed a small algorithm called VECLS, variable n-member constant least square method, and tested it on different types of variability, small variability, medium variability, and large variability in different classes, and then compared it with a case where we do not assume variability among classes, and then the results were quite encouraging and published in that particular paper. Okay, now I will move on to big data. So let's move on from small toy data to big data and see how these are processed. Typically, large number of satellites are there in the constellation now, and there are abundance of data. It's difficult to even think of the volume of the data currently available. Most of our laptops, desktops, they don't even support until we really have high performance computing and large storage these days. So they pose several challenges to us. in terms of data volume, in terms of data access, in terms of how do we scale the algorithm, not only for a district but for the entire country, in terms of how accurate they are. Okay, so till some time back, most of these data were not actually analysis ready, and one we had to do a lot of pre-processing. For example, trying to remove the missing lines, georeferencing, cropping the study area, and so on. This would also pose a kind of a challenge to the user who were at least beginning with new projects or trying to learn remote sensing technologies from some of these advanced satellites. So, as an example, we have now data that are growing from petabytes. Petabytes is not now a very common term widely used in data storage. We are moving from petabyte to exabyte to zettabyte to yottabytes. And to give you an example, the size of the climate change data will be around 350 petabytes by 2030. Petabytes is actually 1000 terabytes. So given these large data sets, actually people are doing some very interesting studies with these huge data, given that they have computing infrastructure. And some of the examples of large scale studies are global vegetation biomass at 100-meter. Okay, high resolution climate projections for the entire globe. This is this is an example of the Landsat Weld product. I will come to this Weld later. Web enabled Landsat data, and then this is tree canopy monitoring of entire United States at 1-meter resolution. So just to give you a number, United States is roughly 3 times the size of India, and imagine processing 1-meter data for the entire country is actually too big. Other larger projects include anomaly detection, monitoring global drought is an ongoing project, and then developing data products like Weld, etc., climate downscaling, tropical rainfall measuring mission is a national level project, and so on. So it's not that the data are just kept idle. Lot of analysis are going on, given that we have some amount of either cloud computing facility or some amount of computing facility available at our labs. So moving on to the same unmixing problem which I have been talking about, now talking about state of the art. So state of the art moved away from simple least squares to signal processing, and then new ideas such as sparse regression. Okay, sparse regression is actually a sparse unmixing via variable splitting and augmented Lagrangian. So detailed of this paper is already published in IEEE Transactions on Geoscience and Remote Sensing. I have highlighted it here, these two papers. So they talk in detail how they use the concept of sparse unmixing in mixing the pixels. And then there is another set of techniques developed by some Chinese researcher based on geometry. So they use geometrical techniques essentially called simplex projection to unmix pixel, and still developments are taking place in statistical method. So I realized that there has been a huge work going on even now in developing algorithms for unmixing. But the issue here is that how do you scale? Most of these papers published in Transactions, they focus on very small toy data. For example, 500 rows by 500 column, and then they are able to show that the proposed algorithm is actually doing very nice on those data. But what happens if we want to scale up to the entire country or the entire globe? How much time, how much computational resource will be required? How good will be the accuracy? How robust will be the algorithm to the noise present on such varied data? So we have done some of the comparison studies and are published in the literature shown at the bottom of the slide. And moving on, we found that the least square method was quite robust, even though it was developed long time back. And the work was further carried out by Professor Chang and his student, who developed the code and then tested it on multiple different scenes by imposing constraints, the abundance, non-negativity, and abundance constituent constraint. However, imposing the two constraints serially is possible, but imposing them simultaneously becomes a problem. So we took help of another technique proposed in the book Lawson and proposed in the book Non-Negative Least Square, written by Lawson and Hansen. Although it's an old book, but this book presents an algorithm called fully constrained least square, non-negative least square. Okay, so a fully constrained least square, this extends a non-negative least square method, and if you apply this on the unconstrained solution here, the two constraints, abundance non-negativity and abundance sum to 1, can be imposed simultaneously on the equation, and hence you get a constrained solution. That means your classes will never be negative, and if you add up all the classes in a pixel, it will be always equal to 100%. Okay, the algorithm was planned to scale up for the entire globe. Moving on from very small data sets of Bangalore, we plan to scale up for the entire globe. So again, this is a bigger challenge. How do you collect training samples from all over the globe? Okay, this was beyond our reach. So we took help of a paper published in Remote Sensing of Environment. Paper title is Multi-Scale Standardized Spectral Emission Model, written by Professor C. Small from University of Columbia and Christina Milesi, who who used to work at NASA Ames in California. So this paper actually deals with ground truth data collection through Landsat data sampled over 100 locations all over the globe, trying to touch different biomes, different diversity, different land cover types. Okay, and what they did is they basically grouped all the different types of classes into 3 classes: substrate, vegetation, and dark objects. What are substrate? Substrates are soil, sediment, rocks, and non-photosynthetic vegetation. Vegetation is all green plants, and dark objects are, for example, your ocean or deep shadow of mountain or any other absorptive substrate material. The graph showing the reflectance of the 3 classes are given in their website along with the reflectance values. So this was used to this was used as a training data to train the algorithm for unmixing the entire global data. We first tested the algorithm on 2-3 smaller areas, essentially in the urban areas of San Francisco and some agriculture setup near Fresno in Central California. And then based on the outcome of this, they were quite encouraging. So then we deployed it over the global data. So these are the results where we analyze the performance of each of the algorithm with respect to robustness, accuracy, and area, and so on. And then it was applied to the entire globe. So entire globe data is available freely for public use for all of us in the form of WELD. The name is WELD, Web Enabled Landsat Data. It's available every month. Okay, every month data has 8,003 scenes. Each scene is of the size 5,295 rows to and 5295 column, and they have 7 spectral bands as in Landsat 7. So we removed the thermal band and we have used only 6 spectral band. So we can actually use all this data for land cover change studies for any part of the globe. And this particular data had 224 billion pixels in 6 dimensions, which was a huge data to process. So using the global ground truth data, we developed this framework for the model to train, and the current data what we have used has 0.35 million scenes for the entire globe. And using a fully constrained least square method, what was an improvement over the method developed by Professor Chang. And then considering the ground truth from Professor Small's paper, we took the 3 classes and then trained the model and then classified the pixels into 4 different categories: urban, forest, farmland, and water bodies for the entire globe. Computing environment, we used Pleiades, which is one of the very nice supercomputer for high-end data processing, and actually it has actually 29 petabytes of RAID disk memory and approximately 250,000 CPU cores installed in that. So this is the output of the 3 classes. This is substrate, vegetation, and this is the dark objects. So as you can see, the darker color here towards 1 represents full presence of the class. So entire northern part of African subcontinent and UAE, etc., are being shown as dark because they are completely covered by sand. And then other places in central United States and some part of Himalayan region, a larger part of Australia, they are all covered by sand. Sand actually comes under the class substrate. Vegetation map is shown here for the entire globe. This is Amazon forest, and this is African forest, and this is part of North Europe and USSR. Larger part of India is also covered with forest. And in order to validate this, we simply generated an NDVI of the entire study area, the entire globe, and we found that the areas shown as vegetation here are also shown as darker green here, values ranging from 0.5 to 1, which indicated that our algorithm is almost giving a correct picture of the vegetation distribution across the globe. This was published in the Remote Sensing Journal. Okay, validation was very difficult because of the large study area, so we had to focus on small area to come to a conclusion. We focused on small area of California and took 1000 sampling points, and each point had 10 observations, and it is shown here for each of the class, and then generated the confusion matrix and the other different accuracies, random different accuracies, the producers, users, overall accuracy, kappa statistics. These were the validation reference from the algorithm for unmixing from a standard machine learning algorithm, which is random forest, and one from the published reports to see how much variation happens when you take a patch of pixels from different parts of the globe and see their variability. So we found that there is almost a 6% improvement over the previously published results in terms of accuracy, of the different classes. The another method, this is actually published in IEEE transactions in geoscience remote sensing. So here what we did is we wanted to classify individual trees across United States, and the tree and the image is 1 meter NAPE data. NAPE is National Agriculture Imagery Program. It's 1 meter resolution data, and we came up with one probabilistic framework where we could identify every single tree in entire country. And this had actually I have actually forgotten, but close to 5 lakh scenes processed together at 1 meter resolution using a high performance computing architecture. And I have shown one sample example of California state and one sample zoomed area of San Francisco city, and this is for the entire United States. So this took actually this processing took more than 3 weeks to for learning and for prediction. Okay, so I have already discussed the outcome. Now let me try to summarize by coming to the challenges and research opportunity. Although there are a few challenges, essentially whether when we download, all of us even willing to use the same data have to download it separately, unnecessary wasting the bandwidth and so on. We tend to utilize lot of space by redundant storage of the same data, and then moving from one place to another place, the data is actually expensive and time consuming. People do not share their knowledge, they do not share the course results, workflows, so we tend to do the same thing again and again in different ways, and it is actually redundant of the work without moving further. So we need some ways of collaborative movement where we can work on visualization of different types of data, work on data volume, data access, how to handle big data, develop some machine learning algorithms, handle multi-resolution data, multimodal data, and deep learning actually is a very interesting topic which has slowly started and being widely used in geospatial data analysis, and promotion and use of free and open source software for different applications. What lies ahead for machine learning now, specifically in spatial data science? Classification is still an important task. Object detection, for example, tree, road extraction, building extraction, and so on. Segmentation using some of the state-of-the-art deep learning techniques. CNN is being used for different applications, faster RCNN, YOLO, UNet, SegNet, PSPNet. Facebook AI has come up with an algorithm called FAIR algorithm, which is used for instant segmentation, and they are being used for different types of application, from precision farming to spatial-temporal data analysis, SAR data analysis, and so on. Hyperspectral image processing is again a very interesting area of work right now, but there are certain challenges such as the high dimensionality of the data and variability of spectral features and so on. Current state of the art include stacked usage of stacked autoencoder, which has been shown to be working by in the paper on a deep learning for hyperspectral image classification published in IEEE Transactions on Geoscience and Remote Sensing 2019. 3D CNN is again state-of-the-art architecture being used in hyperspectral data processing, and two-branch CNN again is a new development in terms of hyperspectral data processing. Spatial computing is again a new idea, and is being used widely across all domains of remote sensing and GIS. So for example, think of a problem where you have to design a smartest route which is also economical, or you want to find out a green corridor from point A to point B, or an ecological route, or a shortest path. So how do we do that? Essentially, all of these involve some kind of algorithm behind the frame, but they cater to different needs. Or developing a location-based services. So you are at a certain point and your GPS device shows that, and then what is this? This is an example of a spatial computing. Or when you use a Yelp or a TripAdvisor or any other location-based services, these are all new areas using online booking of taxi services, or using Trulia, 99 acres, Common Floor. They all use some kind of a location-based services to show you the available houses for rent or booking a taxi. A good amount of development has taken place. Okay, there is some problem. Let me share the screen again. Can you see my screen
Yes,
now?
yes, screen.
Okay. So large developments have taken place by Google. Google has actually introduced planetary scale platform, and they have developed Google Earth Engine, where you do not have to download the data and not at all think about the computing power limitations, because Google provides us free free hosting of data on the cloud, and they will also provide you the computing facility. They also help new users with customized codes written in the form of different algorithms for processing, and it is really interesting to see use all these images. So here one of our PhD student at IIIT Bangalore, Rahisha and Anindita, and Mr. Manjunath from the MTech course, they have worked on Google Earth Engine. I am not able to share the results here, but we will soon publish that. Google Earth Engine hosts a large amount of Landsat data, MODIS data, and data from Sentinel, atmospheric data, and so on, and even NAVE data, for which I was showing you the results at 1 meter resolution. There are new advancements in computing, such as time lapse, where you can actually see the changes happening across the landscape in the temporal domain. So you can see the Brazilian Amazon here, climate change happening essentially in terms of temperature across the globe. This is the zoomed in temperature of surface LST, land surface temperature. And a lot of new developments and challenges exist in three-dimensional GIS. Google has been working a lot in developing algorithms for 3D rendering of objects of cities. They are used in smart cities planning and trying to understand scenarios and so on, for simulations and so on. These are some of the top journals and conferences for spatial data for remote sensing algorithms. Earth Vision CVPR gives us a very nice collection of papers on the new developments. And then there are some IEEE transactions, letters, TPAMI, for which I already talked about. Remote sensing of environment is no doubt one of the best journals, remote sensing letters also, and so on. Here we have done some work which I will be just talking about in 2 to 3 minutes. So here we have developed an algorithm um, to detect potholes, from camera images, and essentially the experiment was done in and around Electronic City in Bangalore. I will show you some results now. And in this paper, again, we have used some deep learning techniques to identify these potholes. So these are the areas in Bangalore where we collected data on potholes and on nice roads, and then we annotated them and used deep learning to predict all other potholes on the road. So now this model is capable of predicting roads on videos. So you take a video from your mobile phone and will do the prediction along with the location of the pothole. So these are the different potholes captured. I had a video, but due to time constraint, I have removed that, where automatic prediction of potholes takes place right away in your mobile phone when you keep it on the deck, and it will guide the driver essentially to avoid those potholes and take a turn where applicable. Some other work we have done on using unmanned aerial vehicle. So we have some data of crops, and we try to segment those crops. In one another work, we worked with Samsung Semiconductors on power line detection. This was presented in INGAS last year in Ahmedabad, and we worked on developing a model that could detect power lines over agriculture farms, and was presented in the 2 conferences and in CVIP 2020. So here the essential problem is that power lines are you can see here in these set of scenes, power lines only pass through smaller areas of the agriculture farm, while rest of the farm is empty. Okay, so this creates a problem of imbalanced classification. You have a minority class as power line, and the majority class is non-power line, which we are not interested in. So this is slightly difficult to train because of the lesser proportion of training data available. You can see this is the power line in the scene, and these are the 2 outputs. This is the intermediate output, and this is the output after the post processing, where we have detected the power line. Power line detection is very important, because if there is a damage in the power line in the middle of the farm, and it's very difficult to trace, and even for human safety, it's not at all advisable to go to that location and check because of the high voltage that passes through that power line. These are some examples of UAV based crop classification using deep learning. They have used UNet model to classify the crops into 3 different classes. We have done some more experiments and included now 5 classes, but I have not been able to share those results here. These are examples of the power line detection for different patches of scenes and different, you can see different backgrounds. This is a dense forest. This is the agriculture farm. This is a sparse forest, and so on. So I would like to say that this field is very overgrowing and very encouraging, and there are lots of job opportunities across, and any work done in this field can fetch jobs and opportunities in all these well-known places. And I would like to thank all my advisors and supervisors at IISc, in NASA, at our director at IIIT Bangalore, and our previous mentors at Stanford and MIT, where I had spent 6 months working on machine learning. And with that, I would like to conclude my thank, and I thank you because you have been listening to me for almost 2 hours. I know that I have taken more time, but hopefully whatever I have presented makes sense and would definitely help us to at least get ahead in machine learning for our science applications. So thank you one and all.
Thank you, Professor Uttam, for delivering the talk on machine learning for data processing for Earth observation data, for covering lots of topic in the span of around 1.5 this hour.